Bum bum ba ba bum bum ba ba bum bum ba ba bum bum ba ba bum 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 bum. Gentlemen, Season 8, Episode 3, Game of Thrones, The Battle of Winterfell, the living versus the army of the dead. I watched that episode and I will say, I was pretty disappointed. Now, this has been some years now, but to be fair, we did cover the Battle of Helm's Deep, and a lot of Lothar fans got really mad at me because I didn't read the books. Well, there's no book for this, suckers, I think. On this episode of Bureau Files, I'm going over how I properly defend Winterfell from the army of the dead. Now, first off, before we dive on in, I want to say a massive thank you to you guys. I was not expecting this channel to get the views and the growth so rapidly. That's wild. So massive thank you to you guys. I appreciate that very much. That is not lost on me, and it is very cool to see that, and I'm happy you guys are enjoying the content so far, minus some of the Lothar fans that I have offended. My press agent is working on a proper statement.
I've made a severe and continuous.
Just kidding. Now, what makes me qualified to cover this battle, to improve its defenses, to go over the strategy? Well, I'm happy you asked. You see, I'm a man who has spent hundreds, maybe even thousands of hours playing the best Total War game ever made. Medieval 2, Total War. Will we ever get a third? Probably not. But God, I am hoping and praying every day. I want to conquer the world with my English longbowmen. Yeoman archers! Hey, archery fans, is this proper bow safety? Am I freaking you out? So some would call me an expert, and to be fair, some would call me an idiot. And both are probably right. Now, I love the concept of the Battle of Winterfell. Game of Thrones already being a fun fantasy show with a medieval backdrop. At this battle, we have steppe cavalry, we have knights, we have hoplites, we have dragons, and we have a horde of the undead. What is there not to love if you are a nerd like me? A massive problem I had, though, is that at this battle, looking at the battle plans that the leadership of the living army was coming up with, I thought there was a massive amount of gross negligence.
What the is this piece of
Their formation, their thought process, the execution, all of it was probably some of the worst I have ever seen. Now, the goal of this video is to improve upon the strategy to maximize the killing of the dead. Wait, they're already dead. To maximize the undeading of the dead that are already dead and reduce casualties of our own army. I guess not my army, but the army of Daenerys Targaryen. The Khaleesi. The goal is essentially to keep Khaleesi's army as intact as possible so she can go on and fight Cersei. In the episode, they lose a massive amount of troops. Pretty much everyone dies in this battle, yet when they go on to King's Landing, there's a whole new army that came out of nowhere. Anyways, Game of Thrones looking to wrap up its final season with Season 8, arguably one of the worst seasons that Game of Thrones ever came out with.
And are you happy with how things ended? Yeah. She didn't say yes.
Best season ever!
Some people were happy with it, others were not, and I was in the not happy with it camp. It felt very rushed. It felt very goofy, a little silly and a little dubious. David Benoit and D.B. Weiss, the showrunners, are typically the ones that are blamed for this bad execution of Season 8 of Game of Thrones, and it was said that they were looking to rush off with it and work on Star Wars. Massive L's in the chat, fam. Now, this is the intel that we're working with. Jon and his entourage have already taken on the army of the dead, or at least dead folk, and they know what kind of foe they are fighting. They went to go and capture one of the zombies, and that's what I'm going to call them because to me they're zombies, and bring it and show it to Cersei so that they can make an alliance and or a truce so that they can deal with the army of the dead. The Night King's army. The Night King's army's coming. The Night King army's coming, brother, and you better prepare. Lost my composure for a second. Now, this mission would cost them a dragon, and they would not get a backup army from Cersei, and I don't think they would technically even get a truce. They know that dragon glass and Valyrian steel and fire can kill these zombies, and the goal is to kill the Night King. Now, the Night King's army would breach through the wall because he has a dragon, and he can overcome its apparent magic, so I'm told. After breaching the wall, I believe he would head and hit up House Umber, at which point they would get more dead to their cause. From House Umber, they have to get to Winterfell. Now, I was asking my internet resources, i.e. doing the Google, doing the chat GPT, and I asked it, how long would it take the undead army to get there to Winterfell? And it told me that it would take 3 to 7 days. Suboptimal. So in the living army, it says there's about 30,000 troops, 5,000 of that being Dothraki cavalry. And when I looked at the Wiki Westeros, it was 100,000 Dothraki riders, but from the show, it definitely did not look like 100,000 Dothraki riders, so I'm gonna go with the 5,000 because that's what it looked like in the show. Okay, I need to catch my breath. There are 2 dragons on the side of the living, trebuchets and catapults, or onagers if you want to call them that, but I don't think they're onagers, I think they're catapults. And of those artillery pieces, I believe it was reported that there are at least 5 to 10 of those catapults and or trebuchets. The dead have over 100,000 dead. They have a giant and they have 1 dragon and 12 White Walkers. They got a lot of infantry. They got an air asset and they got a big boy on the ground. Now, time for the strategy. Do I stay or do I go? That is the question. I have seen multiple videos covering this topic. Invicta comes to mind. He had an excellent video and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And in that video, he talked about using Fabian tactics, denying the enemy conflict, retreating, maybe even hitting them with some guerrilla raids to pick off a few deads every once in a while. I like the idea of pulling south to help bolster the army of the living and maybe not being stuck in Winterfell's snowy conditions. I'm from Arizona. It is constantly hot here.
I'm from Arizona.
Even during our winter time, it would be considered like nice outside for you other guys. It's always some degree of warm. I cannot imagine doing anything in the snow. I may just die or turn into a White Walker, and at which point someone would have to stab me with some Valyrian steel or dragon glass or use a flamethrower. And of course, doing this, you would have to evacuate pretty much everywhere you went, even under the force of like, if you don't leave, we have to kill you. And you have 2 dragons, so you could probably make pretty quick work of it, because if they don't leave, the chances of them joining the army of the dead are pretty high. At which point you would have to fight them, which would be very counterproductive. So everyone's got to retreat south with you. Now, when I was thinking about this, all that mass of people moving down south would probably end up taking a lot of time, or at least being slower than the army of the dead could potentially catch up and move. Now, I was liking the idea of getting away from the snowy conditions of Winterfell, but in the lore it says that the Night King brings winter with him wherever he goes. He's like that dude in college that walks around in gym shorts when it's snowing. I wouldn't know, but I have seen videos. Now, if we do go with this plan, I was looking at the map of Westeros and I was thinking that perhaps a defense taken up in the Vale could be a good option. Now, the Night King is going to go where Bran is, so if you stick Bran in the Vale, maybe set up some sort of traps or some protagonists to protect him to increase his odds of survival. But the Night King is not dumb. He's been around for thousands of years. He may head into the more populated areas, say like the Riverlands, or maybe even go for King's Landing, and the Night King may bolster his army to over 1 million strong, at which point the odds become even that much more stacked against you. Now, going into the Vale could also force Cersei's hand because you're now getting closer into proximity to King's Landing. And if the army of the dead is showing up and now you're closer and then her armies are stationed around in nearby areas, she could just see the cause and come and commit and help fight the army of the dead. But of course, that's all hypothetical. Now, Cersei did pledge an army to go north and help fight against the Night King, but the army did not show up. And to be fair, given that Daenerys Targaryen has 2 dragons and that any chance to get rid of her dragons and or army that challenges Cersei's throne isn't a bad call. It's a little bit risky though, because if that army fails, then you have an army of the dead coming down south to kill your kingdom. So it's a massive roll of dice. There's some sort of statisticians out there that would run the numbers way better than I would. I didn't graduate college. I'm sure you did, college boy. Now, of course, there is a weird fringe benefit for the troops on the ground that if they move south quick enough and the Night King doesn't bring winter with him fast enough, they would have time to prepare defenses while not being in the cold. I would assume trying to dig trenches in cold environments like Winterfell would massively suck. Now, of course, Daenerys Targaryen and Jon Snow would not move south. They would choose to make a stand at Winterfell. So we don't leave. We have 3 to 7 days to prepare. Cut it? Do we say we have 5 days? Maybe meet in the middle? You know what? I want to say we have 7 days. Screw it. We have more time to prepare defenses because the protagonists are there. Buddy, we need a good show too. We need something way better than what we saw in the episode. And buddy, brother, pal, I'm gonna give it to you. Now, I was running the numbers, and of the able-bodied non-combatants, it gave me 2 to 4,000. So we're gonna be generous with these statistics and say 4,000. That's a pretty sizable workforce, and you can get a lot done in 7 days, considering that we're not doing advanced skilled labor for preparing the defenses. Now the goal of the defenses is to build enough stuff that would stop the massive Zerg rush wave that the Army of the Dead would have like we saw in the show. There was nothing to do that, and you saw the massive wave of dead that hit the formation and pretty much what it felt like collapsed it. So in preparation for the defenses, if the regenerative nature of the dragon fire allows, I would like to try and use their fire to help soften up the ground to speed up the process of building trenches. Now, to be fair, I don't know how long it takes for the dragons to regenerate their fire breathing abilities. If they burn through all of it, maybe it takes days to weeks, and maybe we hold off just in case so we can use that fire breathing against the Army of the Dead, and people are just gonna have to suck it up and dig trenches in the cold the hard way. Now, yet again, referencing Invicta, I liked his approach, but I wanted to expand upon it and certain details regarding the army and tactics that we're going to use, and I wanted to switch up some things, add some things, tweak it, and run wild with it. Now we're going to harvest as much wood as possible. This is going to be for the outer wall and for fires to help illuminate the battlefield. Can you hand me that whiteboard back there? Now the outer wall doesn't have to be fancy. What it needs to do is slow down the formation significantly so that you're not getting hit with that massive wave off the rip. Now it's also going to help pool targets for your artillery. Now I was trying to think of some designs that I wanted to go with for the outer wall. Now what I liked and came up with was a trench/wall combo. It would look something like this. So what we would do is, this is the dead side. Do you like how I'm using like a fraction of the whiteboard? Dead side, living side. From the dead side, what we do is we dig a trench and then pile all that dirt on the other side of the trench. Now, depending on how much time we have, of course, will determine the depth of that trench. And then what I would like to see happen is taking the logs from the surrounding forest and we'll stack them on top of each other, ideally doing 3, and of course there'll be some sort of support post. Build the wall! Now, of course, this isn't like the do-all end-all of defenses, and this is going to be unmanned. Yet again, the idea is to slow them down and buy you time. If the Army of the Dead is getting bunched up here, then it just adds to the massive killing field that artillery can't perform. Now, if more time allows, if we crush this task, what I'd like to do to improve this, arts and crafts with bureau files. Deep trench up front, higher wall technically, and then on the other side, there would be a style of catch, like another trench. Now what I would like to do is maybe take the tree limbs and stakes, whatever you can make as fast as you can, and we have a whole spike system in this trench line. As the dead mount the wall, they can fall and catch themselves on these spikes. There are so many dead that it would eventually fill over, and then they would essentially just have to climb over and then climb over their dead. But we're snagging up a lot of dead that way. That would add up, and it keeps your guys from having to fight that much more bad guys. Now they're not gonna die, they're just gonna be stuck. I know that. What is that? It's supposed to be Winterfell. So to recap on Invicta's plan, he had an unmanned wall out here. He had the trench system in front of the army. Then he had some rampart work, chevron defenses, star defenses, angry triangles, whatever the hell you want to call them. And those were used as fatal funnels, and archers could be on the ramparts shooting down, creating more dead inside of this area as the dead breach and continue on to Winterfell. There was also supposed to be archers on the wall along with men-at-arms, I would assume. Now, one thing I was thinking about and I was really on the fence of was how to use the Dothraki. Not just Invicta, but a lot of my personal friends, my family, guys that I talked to about this battle were all on the same page of using the Dothraki as a sweeping cavalry force inside of this no man's land. The artillery is shooting beyond that, the archers are shooting at this phase line right here, God forgive my work, and the Dothraki cavalry was sweeping along, picking off the dead as they trickled in. We have 5,000 Dothraki riders in my scenario. There are over 100,000 dead. Who knows what sort of tidal wave will come through that barrier. Now, something to think about of the Dothraki cavalry. They are not heavy European style cavalry. They are not head to toe in plate armor themselves, and their horse is not up armored. They're facing a foe that has no fear for self-preservation. I would guesstimate it would be very easy for 5 to 10 dead zombies to bum rush one horse and rider and kill him very quickly with no fear at all. A big benefit of horses in history is that you all charge your horses at a real human who can feel pain and fear. Maybe it breaks him, maybe he's running away, you run that dude over with your horse and then you kill him, or you run him down and kill him that way. The dead aren't going to do that. They're going to beeline straight for you in a bunch of kamikaze styles. Hell, even in the battle, a bunch of dead bum rush a dragon are all stabbing it like crazy. You think he's gonna be scared of a horse riding Dothraki? Absolutely not. And for that reason, I wanted to call off the sweeping cavalry inside of this no man's land. I think it's a bad call because they are going to be very prone to being killed themselves, adding to the army of the dead, losing them as an asset. Now, what I was going with is that them being steppe cavalry, chances are they're all going to be pretty good with the bow. They're fantastic horsemen, that's what they do. So what we could do is lean into their strength as horse archers. So now we have the Dothraki riders hitting the flanks of the army. Maybe they'll chase down some of the riders, but the riders can always pull off with their faster horses. Maybe even lead those undead closer to friendly lines where archers can pick them off so that they can restart the flank hitting process with their arrows. And eventually they'll run out of arrows. They could retire back and play as a reserve unit ready to fill any gaps on the line. Maybe they'd have to dismount, but I like going with that approach. Now, one thing they didn't do in the show is I would like to have this area, in even beyond, filled with fires, like fire pits of any kind. Now, I want to do this so we can illuminate the battlefield. In the show, there's like no light, and then they were like, light the trench. And then the red woman comes out and she's like, hana, 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 and it blows up or catches on fire. So I like the idea of having visible line of sight of what's coming at you. And of course, the fires will ramp up as we get closer to this line over here. Fire pit, fire pit, fire pit. Massive fire pits filled with very flammable materials. It's all coming together. So we have established that Dothraki will not be doing sweeping cavalry charges. We have filled the dead space with more fire, giving us better visual aid, and there's a lot of dead space in the middle that we can now fill up with obstructions to help slow down the horde that much more. Hell, maybe we even do, you get another trench. I'm adding to the first trench so it looks more intimidating. All right, another trench. I was thinking about you even put anything out there that could be a tripping hazard at the very least in this dead space. Everything will matter in slowing down a massive horde. Hell, carts you ain't using, broken down things, barrels, whatever you can fashion at like a shin-high, knee-high level and or more trenches will make a massive world of difference for slowing down that horde. They don't get tired, they don't feel fear, they're dead. So we gotta slow them down to give our boys on the bows a chance. One thing that I saw, and I liked the idea, was dragonglass caltrops. Now it's kind of hard to tell if you actually have to hit the zombie like in the vital areas to actually kill it with dragonglass, or if it's one of those things like you slash it on the wrist and it just instantly dies. If that's the rules, then yeah, we're throwing a bunch of dragonglass caltrops out there. They can all run over those caltrops. Heckin' funny. The artillery should know all their ranges out beyond the inner trench so that if they see a juicy opportunity of these zombies gathering together, they can hit that pocket and use their force multiplying tool of probably a massive jar of burning liquid. On top of the fire pits, trench being on fire, as much fire as we can get going on this battlefield as possible is ideal. I was thinking that would be very meta is wildfire. Tyrion Lannister for sure knew about wildfire. Wildfire, of course, being used to destroy Stannis Baratheon's fleet. Now the problem though is the wildfire is crafted and controlled by the Alchemist Guild, and the Alchemist Guild is based out of King's Landing, of course under Cersei's control. So why would Cersei want to equip her enemies with a better chance? But maybe Jaime Lannister could have stole some wildfire and brought it up. I wish there was more wildfire. Would have been sick. Stuff burns hot. There's an old saying about wildfire. Piss on it and it may burn off your pee-pee. I don't want to say the other word. My mom might be watching. Did everyone get this? Did you guys take notes? Okay, it's going away. Get your phones out, take a photo. This is gonna be on the test. I liked Invicta's approach with the chevron triangle of death approach, the fatal funnel. Building ramparts with spikes. That's supposed to represent like the smaller trench at the base of these ramparts. And then of course we have, just out of frame, our outer fire trench pit, also filled with sharp objects and flames, because it's cool. It's good for showbiz. Now, we've got to utilize our assets. One of those assets being the unsullied infantry. Since they were children, all they have known is the way of soldiering. Brutally raised, no emotions. They feel no pain. They know no fear. In some ways, they're as close to the army of the dead as a living can get. We're going to utilize those infantry in a very specific way, the phalanx. Looking at them, they kind of have a Greek style of presentation. They almost have a quasi-linothorax with their armor, and they look out of place for Westeros, which looks more medieval. Their fighting style is a shield wall with shields and spears, but they are lacking in some aspects. Now, what I would like to do with these hoplites is make them the hammers at the fatal funnels. As the army of the dead naturally funnels into these hammers, the hoplites will be there to meet them and use their spears. Now, one thing I wanted to improve upon about the Unsullied hoplites, I'm going to call them because it sounds sick. Their spears were kind of short, in my opinion. I think that they should have gone with pikes, and they could have had a little bit more standoff space against their opponent, that being the army of the dead, and more guys in the further back ranks can get their spears in the formation as well. Pikes. They were good enough for Alexander the Great, and they were good enough for Renaissance Europe. They'll be good enough for the Unsullied. Now maybe we even go some sort of quasi-mini tercio where we have men-at-arms in full plate armor, even though there wasn't really an example of full plate armor, but technically there are Knights of the Vale there, and there are other armored up individuals that could be sparsed out inside of that formation. So as the dead get close to that formation, maybe they're breaking in between some of the pikes, those guys can be there to help stop that, and they can kill those that get inside that formation. Could be maybe too much in-depth detail, could be not. Could be on the toilet watching this, drinking your coffee, eating your beer, and this may be perfect, and hopefully your legs are asleep by now, and the fire department has to come and peel you off of that toilet. Godspeed. And then on the ramparts up in this area, we have bowmen raining down arrows onto the dead from their flanks as they approach. Now, if I was going to take a shot in the dark, because this battle takes place at nighttime. Now, on the wall, you're also going to need some men-at-arms to help defend those archers as they continue to pour arrows, because I would guesstimate that the dead would try and climb and navigate the ramparts to get on top of them. The defenders on the ramparts, having the high ground, should be easier to take out those dead, and if all of our other defenses are working, it won't be a massive wave like we saw on the show. I was doing my homework and rewatched that episode, and it was a literal like, Cowabunga, dead wave. Now, one thing that I really wish the Army of the Living would have had was a Scorpio, or a Scorpion, a Roman-styled tension siege engine. As far as siege engines go, it's kind of small. It's like having a very large crossbow. Here bro goes, show and telling again. Here we have a medieval crossbow. Imagine this, but much bigger on a stand, and then you can crank it using a lever style mechanism. Now, the Scorpion, unlike this crossbow, it doesn't have a big crossbow. Instead, it uses tension from round up ropes. Looking at one, it doesn't look that complex to make, and you get a lot more range and firepower out of that projectile. It's like hurling a small spear much faster than you could throw it. I like that. That would come in useful for a number of reasons. One reason, maybe you get a collateral on some dead boys. You hit them with your dragon glass tipped bolt and you get 1, 2, 3, triple kill. Or the dead have a giant, a Scorpion launching massive bolts would be pretty useful against the giant. Maybe that giant's a little bit more resistive to the archers. He's stumbling along out of nowhere, right? He's dead, baby. That giant don't stand a chance, and very importantly, they could be even used potentially for anti-air against Viserion, the Night King's dragon that he killed and took for himself. Now, to be fair, there could be the argument that they just don't have that knowledge of how to make the Scorpion. It's just one of those things, they don't know what they don't know. Now, Sam Tarly did go to the Citadel Library where he learned the White Walker weaknesses. In theory, do a little potential, he could have stumbled across something in his studies that showed him how to make a Scorpio, or a Scorpion, whatever you want to call it. That's just a theory, a Bureauphile's theory. Now, if we do make those Scorpios, we would make as many as possible and mount them up everywhere we can. I'm thinking potentially we have some sort of Scorpio on the ramparts. You know, from the top down, that's not a bad Scorpio drawing. You're welcome, viewer. So I'm thinking Scorpions on the ramparts, Scorpions on the castle walls, on the towers, in anticipation for the dragons. If you're on the walls up high, you're lobbing bolts out far. Oh, there's a dragon. Take your pot shot as it maybe flies by low. There's a risk. Potentially you could run into some friendly fire if the dragons are duking it out up there, and there's only a limited range on these things. You're not like beaming it to the stratosphere, so you gotta be careful. Now, kind of coming back to this, one thing I did notice about the battle is that there was a lot of quasi-plate armor. You don't really see guys in head-to-toe plate armor. You don't see a lot of helmets, at least for the protagonist. Like, I would be wanting to wear a helmet, but how am I gonna get this mug on camera? As I talk to a camera right now, am I wearing a helmet? No. I get it. I get why in the show they wouldn't be wearing helmets, but in this battle, if I was there, I'd be like, yeah, I want a helmet. I want head-to-toe plate armor. Give me some kind of like obsidian claw hammer thingy. Dragon glass, I'm sorry. Now, another video I watched, I forget the creator and I'm sorry, but he made an excellent point of saying that your archers have some of the best dragon glass to kill ratio. That small little arrowhead taking out an entire white zombie, whatever you want to call them. And those archers better be all over the place. Kind of coming back to the Dothraki thought process is maybe even after those guys on those sweeping flanks run out of arrows, they just ditch the whole sweeping flank, come and rebolster the main army, help relieve tired archers, even though they're going to be kind of tired themselves, but they're supposed to be elite cavalry, nomadic steppe people, so maybe they're just that much better, and they can rearm themselves with more arrows. These arrows are going to be massively important. And not only are the people involved with building the defenses going to have to be putting all hands on deck on this, they're also going to have to be putting all hands on deck on building scorpions, building bolts for those, and building thousands and thousands, potentially over 100,000 arrows. Now, I wanted to kind of get into the minutia of this. How do we save time building hundreds of thousands of arrows? Because arrows are in some ways laborious to make. I would say one of the harder parts would be the handcrafted metal head. Now we get to skip that and you can shape out these smaller dragon glass heads, and tying them on could be a little bit easier than having to forge out a bunch of more rugged, durable metal arrowheads that were expected to be used on living targets. Show and tell. Here we have a arrow for a longbow. This is a Mary Rose style arrow, and we have a handcrafted bodkin point on the end. And we have our fletching. Now these arrows are works of art. They are tapered, they are handcrafted. I got these from Todd's workshop, and in the nock there is a horn inlet because on the English warbows the massive weight runs a chance of splitting your arrows. Now, one thing we could do to speed up the process is you have your shafts being made, your dragon glass being fit to it. Maybe on the bows they're not shooting as high as poundage bows, so you can skip the whole horn inlet on those nocks. And to be fair, in the show I paused it on one of like the archery scenes when Theon Greyjoy is in the garden, like he's like shooting arrows and they have like a tight shot. And some of those arrows look like they definitely had some modern nocks. I was shutting my brain off trying to enjoy it. Anyway, another thing would be doing just 2 feathers for fletching. Now, as someone that makes my own arrows, not as good as this, the fletching part is very annoying and very time consuming. You have to get your glue set. Oh no, even this fletching is coming loose. You gotta fix that. You have to get your glue set, you have to get your binding around the fletching. So potentially when we're doing the fletching, just sticking with 2 feathers on there as opposed to a third will save us that much more time, which could add up massively. Now, getting into some more details for this battle plan. One thing I'd wanna add around the fortification, I'm just gonna show an example here, and I wanna keep them within line of sight of each other, is a style of tower. I thought it may have been redundant to do this because there are castle walls right behind them. For the purposes that I'm thinking of, could this be redundant? But when I look at Winterfell, some of the line of sight of trying to maintain this entire line may be obstructed. So I thought, well, what if we went with some style of watchtower built up 1 to 3 stories off the ground to help give leadership a better picture of what's going on so that they can communicate with their guys around them, the other leaders, so they can orchestrate a much more well-oiled defense. So say we have some sort of tower up here, right? And then for an example, on the other flanks with maintaining the line of sight, if we look at the map, you can kind of see like an angle you can run where at least both towers on the flanks should be able to see the tower in the middle. So that way, using whatever you have, arm signals, torches, lanterns, you can communicate with those towers, give them a one like, hey, we're getting jacked up over here, we need some more guys, or hey, we need more arrows, whatever your signals you come up with in the short amount of time, so that way you are better prepared. Now, another detail that we can add to this are runners. People that will physically move from one place to another to relay commands, orders, intel, as well as runners bringing up food, supplies, water, arrows, whatever the army needs, right? I know there was a lot of women down in the crypts with their kids. Maybe those grown women could be of some more use, running around, keeping the army well fed and maintained, potentially treating injuries, bringing them to the rear. Another thing to consider is that if there are rise of casualties, there should be small teams on hand within each of these little groups that are tasked with burning those bodies. So if we have the burning trench in front of us, or maybe have some burn pits behind us where you can take that body and throw it into the fire. So if there's a chance that the Night King is going to raise up more dead, then that can rob him of that chance of adding to his army. Now real quick, I did want to talk about the artillery before we move on to one of the most valuable assets that the human army has. The artillery in the show was abysmal. They got off like one volley and that was it, and they got overran. They had very little ammo on hand at that, so I don't know what the plan was entirely. And not only did they get off like one volley, but they were in front of the entire mass formation, and it was terrible, terrible ideas. Any noob to Total War knows you just don't put your catapults and trebuchets out there in front of your infantry. So ideally we would have them back behind the lines, on the ramparts, on the towers, wherever it's feasible. The tower approach I like, putting them up there, assembling them up there may be a hassle, but yet again your life depends on it. I know there's a lot of work to be done, but they would have that added elevation of being up high and focusing on those kill zones. So your artillery focusing on this outer wall kill zone as well as pre-sighted interior. The Dothraki are no longer coming into the interior sweeping area, they're just hitting the flanks, and then we have archer fire hitting this trench line right here, on top of scorpion fire if we have that. I know we don't have the scorpions, it's okay, but in my imagination we do. So that quickly covers the artillery. Now we get to the most important asset that the humans have, the dragons. Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen riding around the dragons, ready to spring at a moment's notice. I like during the battle plans, Jon Snow is like, I'm gonna stick close to Bran, and then he's like pissed off to a mountain with Daenerys as Bran's in the Godswood. Brilliant. Oh, Bran. We'll get there. So with the dragon air assets we have, arguably the most game-breaking aspect of Game of Thrones, the flying napalm machines. We gotta use those. There's the caveat that the Night King has his own dragon. This is a massive bummer. And he has the ability to fall your dragons with relative ease, as we saw when he took down Viserion. So what do? I like the idea of sweeping strafing runs. One dragon is going to sweep in and discern where the most casualties he can inflict on the enemy will be, hit that area, and fly off. Now coming back to the topic of how many napalm gun runs do we get out of these dragons? I don't know. I can't recall if it was ever said. I don't know how much time we'll have or fuel in the belly. It's all guesstimation. Now one thing to consider is they're just hitting the army of the dead with as many gun napalm dragon runs as possible, and then eventually those dragons are going to run out of fuel, I'd assume, right? You can't make these things just super endless flame meta because then it's just broken. Now, when they do run out of that fuel, then they would become pretty much permanent air interdiction fire team of 2 against the dragon. Because while one dragon is conducting a flaming gun run, the other dragon will be circling the airspace all around looking for the Night King. Right? Just banking around, looking for wherever the Night King's dragon may show up. Now, if that dragon that was doing the gun runs flying down, banking off, coming back, hitting the army of the dead again, runs out of fuel, flies up, that dragon sees him, comes down and dispenses all the fuel with its gun runs. Now, things to consider is that perhaps we don't want to expense all of our fuel, right? When I say that, I would mean that we have some reserve in the tank to deal with the Night King. The dragon rider should know, whether it's Jon or Daenerys, hey, chances are this dragon only has so much fuel left. Let's hold it in reserve in case we do come across the Night King's dragon and the Night King himself. But we will learn that Dragonfire does not kill the Night King. Big bummer. Night King OP. I can't believe how much thought I put into this. Another minutia of details worried about with the dragons is if they're doing all these gun runs flying around, burning that fuel, does this take a physical toll on the dragon? Would they get worn out that much quicker? And is that something that the dragon riders would have to consider if they're expecting to get in a knockdown, drag out fight with an already dead dragon that doesn't get tired? These are all little things that I'm kind of workshopping in my brain, right? And we're trying to use the assets that we have on hand to better win this battle. Now, all of this is coming together rather nicely. We got a sick plan on the whiteboard. It's taken shape. It's looking like we're gonna have a much better chance than what we had before. Brothers, sisters, there is hope. But the Night King still has some tricks to play. He is a magical, very powerful entity. For sure, I could see him bringing on the blizzard like he did in the episode. Now that blizzard jacks up a lot of stuff. What is that gonna do to our fire pits? What is that gonna do to our general fire and our communication, our line of sight, and the morale, right? A massive cold blizzard rolling in from the north, obscuring vision, and it allows the Night King to infiltrate in beyond our lines that we feel comfy and perhaps slip past the inner perception of the dragon that was looking for him. Jon and Daenerys can't fly those dragons too well in a blizzard. I mean, I have a hard time thinking you'd fly anything good in a blizzard, but they would have to get above it so they aren't getting risk of getting ambushed or running into each other. Now, the counters to the blizzard aren't great. The troops would quite literally have to weather out the storm. The only thing I could think of is if in this hypothetical that maybe some wildfire showed up and there was a raging flame going to where it could help maybe even contradict that blizzard with this extreme flame going where the fire is still being in good effect, but we don't get that. So maybe another form of extreme flame. It's really hard to say. So it's just gonna have to let that magic ability run its course, because I would assume the Night King has a cap on so many magical abilities that he can't do them non-stop. Maybe he has some sort of refresh rate unless he's just that meta of an opponent. This is another one of those where I was kind of racking my brain on. I'm sure you guys in the comments probably have a good come up with. The Night King is coming after Bran. He wants to kill him. If he was going to be our bait in the Vale, he's going to be our bait now. So where do we put him? I was trying to think where we would put him besides the gods would. Would we go with the crypt plan? Would we put him in the keep? What would we do? What would be our plan? I like some level of idea of having prepared defenses to protect Bran to give our guys a better chance. In the show, in the Godswood, it's Theon with the other Ironborn, and they're pretty much just got their bows, and there's no readily made defenses to help slow down the dead. No walls, no palisades. There's a bunch of shrubbery obscuring their line of sight, so when the dead do infiltrate, they're getting in and they're getting to Bran that much quicker. So it's kind of tough to say, right? And especially if the Night King's coming for him, then what do we do? Do we stack more protagonists in there that have a better chance of killing the other antagonist? This is one of those where I was really trying to think of how I would go about it. Now, as we know in the show, Arya Stark shows up, ex machinas her way past all the dead to get a sick Valyrian blade kill against the Night King. Where was she the whole time? I guess what we'll do is just stick Arya Stark on Bran and we'll be a-okay. You're welcome. Now, while Bran is well protected by Arya Stark, the ex machina machine for killing the Night King, he should have been using those powers he has for gathering intel on troop movements and where the Night King is himself. I think he's considered like a ward or something like that, where you can access animals and use them and control them and see what they see. Hey man, that would have been pretty useful. You just do your like eye roll thing, you know, you just like, wait, it's like there's like the sound effect. So, please do the sound effect. Now, of course, this battle plan that I have laid out before you is a better battle plan than what we saw in the show. Just about any battle plan that you could come up with on your own or any other YouTube monkey came up with is a better battle plan than what we saw in the show. As someone that enjoys this kind of history, it was very much a bummer to see the massive amount of potential that it had as far as a creative concept letting us down. Zombies, cool. Dragons, cool. Dothraki horse step cavalry, cool. Knights, cool. Magic, cool. But they let us down. I'm happy to finally get this out of my head. I got nothing else for you guys. And I know this is a very sexy topic to women. Dude, if I was at the Battle of Winterfell, I'd have my blade, and I'd just shot, shabat, shaboom. Except to be dragon glass. So I gotta get out of here before I get trampled by them all.